The South Caucasus is a region of dramatic landscapes home to Armenia and Azerbaijan. For centuries, this area has been a crossroads between Europe and Asia, and between great empires. The mountains have isolated communities, helping them preserve their unique cultures. Armenians are one of the world's oldest Christian nations. Azerbaijanis are predominantly Shia Muslims. The borders we see today were drawn and redrawn by outside forces. At the heart of the conflict is the mountainous territory of Nagorno-Karabakh. The question of who this land belongs to is about identity, survival, and national pride. The end of World War I and the collapse of the Russian Empire created an opportunity for Armenia and Azerbaijan to declare independence in 1918. Defining borders became an immediate issue, particularly over Nagorno-Karabakh, a region with an Armenian majority within Azerbaijani territory. By the early 1920s, the Soviet Union gained control, and the border question fell to Moscow. In 1921, Nagorno-Karabakh was made an autonomous oblast within the Azerbaijan Soviet Socialist Republic, a decision that would have long-term consequences. For 70 years, the conflict was frozen, but underlying tensions remained. In the late 1980s, with the Soviet Union weakening, the conflict thawed. In 1988, Nagorno-Karabakh voted to secede from Azerbaijan and join Armenia, igniting mass protests and escalating tensions. The conflict over Nagorno-Karabakh is more than just a territorial dispute. It has become a central part of national identity for both Armenians and Azerbaijanis. For Armenians, the fight is linked to the trauma of the 1915 Armenian genocide. For Azerbaijan, the conflict is about its territorial integrity. The displacement of hundreds of thousands of Azerbaijanis created a deep national grievance. The region is a critical energy corridor, vital for the energy security of many Western nations. Major global powers have a vested interest in the stability of the South Caucasus. Understanding this conflict is essential because it is a story of how modern nations are forged in the fire of war. The story of Armenians and Azerbaijanis is a deeply human one. 1988 was a turning point as tensions in Nagorno-Karabakh broke open. The regional Soviet requested the territory be transferred from Azerbaijan to Armenia, challenging Baku and Moscow. News of the vote ignited mass demonstrations. Azerbaijanis viewed it as an illegal act of separatism. Moscow, led by Mikhail Gorbachev, was caught off guard. As protests grew, violence appeared. Clashes broke out, and 2 Azerbaijanis were killed, escalating the conflict. Soviet intervention was too little, too late, trust collapsed, and the Soviet Union showed its weakness. Just days after violence in Askaran, the conflict took a horrific turn. In Sumgait, a wave of brutal anti-Armenian violence erupted. For 3 days, organized mobs roamed the streets, targeting Armenian residents, looting and burning property. The police were slow to intervene, leaving the population defenseless. The official death toll was 32, though many believe it was higher. The pogrom sent a shockwave of terror throughout the Armenian community. For Armenians, it was a state-condoned massacre, echoing past genocides. It hardened their resolve to separate Nagorno-Karabakh from Azerbaijan, viewing it as a matter of survival. The aftermath was a mass exodus, with hundreds of thousands becoming refugees. As the Soviet Union weakened, Moscow's grip on Nagorno-Karabakh slipped, and chaos filled the void. Mass protests gave way to armed militias, Armenian Fedayeen and Azerbaijani volunteer battalions, each side scrambling for weapons and control. Skirmishes, ambushes, and blockades replaced demonstrations, plunging the region into a low-level guerrilla war. By 1991, with the USSR gone, both Armenia and Azerbaijan declared independence, and their militias became the seeds of new national armies. The stage was set for a devastating full-scale war. The Soviet collapse unleashed a conventional war, Armenia and Azerbaijan racing to seize Soviet arms, transforming militias into armies. Cities like Stepanakert endured relentless shelling, civilians hid in basements as battles raged. In February 1992, the Khojaly tragedy marked a brutal turning point, fueling rage and hardening positions on both sides. The fall of Khojaly broke Stepanakert's siege but deepened Azerbaijan's political crisis. Armenian forces shifted from defense to offense and the war escalated beyond Nagorno-Karabakh's borders. Both nations were now locked in a fight for survival, with no end in sight. Armenian victories at Shusha and the Lachin Corridor in 1992 linked Nagorno-Karabakh to Armenia, shifting the war's momentum. Azerbaijan's counteroffensive briefly reclaimed territory, but supply lines faltered and Armenian forces regrouped. By 1993, Armenians not only retook lost ground but pushed into Azerbaijani districts, citing security needs. Hundreds of thousands of civilians fled, creating a humanitarian crisis. International condemnation followed, but resolutions had little effect. The war now raged deep inside Azerbaijan. By 1994, exhaustion and devastation forced both sides to the table. 30,000 dead, over 1 million displaced, economies shattered. Armenia faced blockades and shortages. Azerbaijan struggled with refugees and war costs. International mediators led by Russia and the OSCE Minsk Group pushed for peace. In May 1994, a Russian-brokered ceasefire froze the conflict, leaving Armenian forces in control of Nagorno-Karabakh and surrounding districts. The ceasefire was not a peace treaty, just a pause, with political status unresolved and refugees in limbo. The war ended, but the conflict simmered on. The 1994 ceasefire ended large-scale fighting but cemented a stalemate. Armenian forces held Nagorno-Karabakh and 7 Azerbaijani districts. No country recognized this new reality, not even Armenia. International mediators proposed land for peace deals, but deep mistrust blocked progress. Azerbaijan demanded full territorial restoration before talks on status. Armenians insisted on security and self-determination first. Each side saw compromise as existential risk. For decades, the conflict remained frozen. No war, no peace. The 1994 ceasefire didn't bring true peace. The line of contact remained tense, reminiscent of World War I. For over 20 years, it was one of the world's most militarized borders. Ceasefire violations and artillery exchanges became routine. Life continued under the shadow of unresolved conflict. Nagorno-Karabakh tried to build state institutions, isolated from the world. In Azerbaijan, the stalemate profoundly impacted society. Hundreds of thousands of IDPs were a constant reminder of lost territories. The government poured billions into its military, modernizing with advanced weaponry. A generation grew up after the ceasefire, with the war a historical fact and present reality. There was virtually no contact between the two nations, and the division grew. For years, the sporadic violence along the line of contact had been a low-intensity affair. It resulted in a steady stream of casualties but never threatened the overall stability of the 1994 ceasefire. That changed dramatically in the early morning hours of April 2, 2016. Azerbaijan launched a sudden and coordinated offensive along several points of the front line. Using heavy artillery, tanks, and attack drones, Azerbaijani forces attempted to break through the Armenian defensive lines. This escalation marked the most intense fighting since the ceasefire was signed over 2 decades earlier. The world watched as the frozen conflict suddenly became hot again. The fighting raged for 4 days. Both sides deployed heavy weaponry and accused the other of starting the violence. The main clashes took place in the northeast and southeast of the line of contact. Azerbaijani forces managed to capture several strategic positions and a few small pieces of territory, including the tactically important Lalatapa Height in the south. For Azerbaijan, this was a significant military and psychological victory. It was the first time since 1994 that they had successfully retaken any territory held by Armenian forces. The success, however limited, demonstrated the growing strength of their modernized army and boosted national morale. For the Armenian side, the 4-day war was a wake-up call. They were caught by surprise by the scale and intensity of the Azerbaijani attack. While they managed to halt the main advance and prevent a major breakthrough, they suffered significant casualties and lost some ground. The clashes revealed vulnerabilities in their defensive positions, and highlighted the technological advantage Azerbaijan had gained with its new military hardware, particularly its effective use of Israeli-made kamikaze drones. The fighting also sparked a wave of patriotic fervor in Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh, with thousands of volunteers rushing to the front lines to defend their positions. On April 5, 2016, a new ceasefire was brokered in Moscow, bringing the intense fighting to an end. Although the clashes lasted only 4 days, they left over 100 soldiers dead on both sides and several civilians. The event shattered the long-held illusion of a stable, frozen conflict. It proved that the status quo was unsustainable, and that the risk of a new full-scale war was very real. The 4-day war changed the dynamic of the conflict permanently. It emboldened Azerbaijan, which now saw a military solution as a viable option. It also hardened the resolve on the Armenian side. The fragile ceasefire of 1994 was effectively broken, setting the stage for an even larger and more decisive confrontation. The fragile peace was shattered on September 27, 2020, when Azerbaijan launched a large-scale military offensive. This marked the beginning of the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War. Azerbaijan stated it was responding to Armenian shelling to restore its territorial integrity. Unlike the First War, this conflict involved modern, well-equipped militaries. Drones, especially the Turkish-made Bayraktar TB2, dominated the battlefield, giving Azerbaijan a decisive advantage. Azerbaijan made steady gains, particularly in the southern sector, using drones for surveillance and attacks. International calls for a ceasefire were largely ignored as Azerbaijan pressed forward. The map of the region was being redrawn by force. As the war progressed into October, Azerbaijan's military strategy became clear. After securing a foothold in the south, its forces began a grueling advance northwards through the Jabrayil and Fuzuli districts. The fighting was fierce, with Armenian forces offering stiff resistance in some areas. However, the technological superiority of the Azerbaijani military, especially its dominance of the skies, was the defining factor of the conflict. The constant threat of drone strikes had a devastating effect on the morale and operational capacity of the Armenian soldiers. They were forced to disperse, hide, and move mostly at night, making it difficult to organize effective counterattacks or to resupply their positions. While drones dominated the headlines, the war was also a brutal ground conflict. Azerbaijani infantry and special forces had to fight for every town and village. The battles for strategic locations like Hadrut were intense and bloody. As Azerbaijani forces pushed deeper into Nagorno-Karabakh, they moved from the southern plains into the more mountainous and forested terrain of the highlands. This slowed their advance and gave some advantage back to the defenders who were more familiar with the landscape. However, the relentless pressure continued. The Azerbaijani military systematically captured territory along the southern border with Iran, eventually severing the main southern supply route from Armenia to Nagorno-Karabakh. The ultimate prize of the war was the strategic and symbolic city of Shusha. Known as Shushi to Armenians, the fortress city sits on a commanding clifftop overlooking Stepanakert. Its capture in 1992 had been a pivotal moment for the Armenians in the First War. For Azerbaijanis, its recapture was a primary objective, really a matter of national honor. In late October, elite Azerbaijani special forces began a daring operation. They advanced through dense forests and steep ravines to bypass Armenian defenses and assault the city directly. Heavy fighting for the city began in early November, with brutal, close-quarters combat taking place in the streets. The battle for Shusha was the climax of the war. After several days of intense and bloody fighting, Azerbaijani forces secured control of the city on or around November 8th. The fall of Shusha was a catastrophic blow to the Armenian war effort. It was not only a major psychological defeat but also a strategic disaster. With Shusha in Azerbaijani hands, the main road connecting Armenia to Stepanakert, the Lakin corridor, was under direct threat, and Stepanakert itself was vulnerable to attack from above. The military situation for the remaining Armenian forces in Nagorno-Karabakh had become untenable. The war had reached its decisive turning point. With the fall of Shusha, the military collapse of the Armenian forces in Nagorno-Karabakh was imminent. The road to Stepanakert was, effectively cut, and the capital was left defenseless. Facing a total and devastating defeat, the Armenian leadership had no choice but to accept a settlement. On the night of November 9, 2020, the Prime Minister of Armenia, Nikol Pashinyan, the President of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, and the President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, signed a trilateral ceasefire statement. The agreement was, essentially, a capitulation for the Armenian side. It brought an end to 44 days of intense fighting, but it did so on terms dictated by Azerbaijan's military victory. The terms of the agreement were dramatic and transformative. It stipulated that Armenian forces would withdraw from all the occupied districts surrounding Nagorno-Karabakh that they still held, Kalbajar, Agdam, and Lachin. The parts of Nagorno-Karabakh that Azerbaijan had captured during the war, including the city of Shusha, would remain under Azerbaijani control. The agreement also called for the deployment of nearly 2,000 Russian peacekeepers to the region for a 5-year term. These peacekeepers would secure the remaining parts of Nagorno-Karabakh still inhabited by Armenians and would protect the Lachin corridor, a 5-kilometer-wide strip of land that would remain as the only link between Nagorno-Karabakh and Armenia. The war had a devastating human cost. While exact figures are disputed, It is estimated that over 7,000 soldiers and several hundred civilians were killed on both sides. The fighting also created a new wave of displacement. Tens of thousands of Armenians fled their homes in the parts of Nagorno-Karabakh that came under Azerbaijani control. In Azerbaijan, the victory was met with widespread celebrations as the nation rejoiced in the restoration of its control over long-lost territories. In Armenia, the announcement of the ceasefire agreement was met with shock, grief, and anger. Protesters stormed government buildings in Yerevan, viewing the deal as a national betrayal. The 2020 war fundamentally altered the geopolitical reality of the South Caucasus. It ended the 26-year-long stalemate and overturned the results of the First War. Azerbaijan emerged as the clear victor, having achieved most of its long-standing objectives through military force. The role of Russia as the main power broker was reaffirmed with the deployment of its peacekeepers, while Turkey's influence in the region grew significantly through its strong support for Azerbaijan. The conflict's resolution was not a negotiated peace, but a victor's peace, leaving many issues unresolved and honestly planting the seeds for future instability. A new fragile and uncertain chapter had begun for the people of the region. Throughout the conflict, numerous attempts were made to find a diplomatic solution, primarily through the OSCE Minsk group. For decades, international mediators worked to bridge the gap between Armenian and Azerbaijani positions, proposing peace plans based on the Madrid principles. These principles were a delicate balancing act, addressing the core demands of both sides. They included the return of territories surrounding Nagorno-Karabakh, an interim status providing security, and a future determination of its final status. These talks were fraught with difficulty and failed to produce a breakthrough before the 2020 war due to deep-seated mistrust and opposing views. The failure serves as a stark reminder of the conflict's intractability. The inability to find a diplomatic solution created a dangerous vacuum that was eventually filled by military force. Beyond politics and military strategy, the conflict is a human story. On the Azerbaijani side, nearly 1 million people were displaced during the First War. For almost 30 years, they dreamed of returning home. On the Armenian side, the conflict brought loss and a feeling of existential threat. The struggle was seen as a fight for their very existence. Despite hatred, individuals on both sides have made efforts to build bridges. These initiatives aim to humanize the enemy and challenge official narratives. For true peace, it will require dealing with the past and acknowledging each other's pain. The faint glimmers of dialogue offer a fragile hope for a different future. Today, the South Caucasus is in a new reality after the 2020 war. Azerbaijan has restored its sovereignty over Nagorno-Karabakh. A fragile peace is enforced by Russian peacekeepers. The road to lasting peace faces immense challenges. In September 2023, Azerbaijan's operation led to the exodus of nearly all ethnic Armenians from the region, creating a humanitarian crisis. The path forward involves normalizing relations, border delimitation, opening transportation links, and a peace treaty. Talks, mediated internationally, are slow, with every border kilometer contested. The challenge is transforming the victor's peace into a durable one that both societies accept. The alternative, perpetual hostility, is too high a price for either nation.